Good evening, everyone. I'm Laura Ingraham in Washington. Let's get right to the angle. Let me tell you what we're not going to get used to in the United States as the new normal, or dismiss as a one-off or just another senseless act of violence. When a jihadist games our immigration system, gets a green card, rents a truck, and in the name of Allah mows down innocents in a major American city. That is not, nor will it ever be, acceptable in the U.S., particularly when it's preventable, as this act of terror may have been. Like clockwork, the platitudes are flying from city officials.
Is an international symbol of freedom and democracy. That's what we are, and we are proud of it. That also makes us a target for those people who oppose those concepts.
Of course, New York is susceptible to attack, duh. Every city is susceptible to attack. Those words mean nothing. We want action from elected officials to keep this country and cities like New York safe. And listening to this makes me think of the mass Islamic resettlement in Europe. We saw terror attacks in Barcelona, Paris, London, Manchester, on and on. Now, do you remember what we heard from Polish Prime Minister Beata Szydło last summer after the truck attack in Manchester, England? She said the following: "Do we want politicians who claim we have to get used to attacks or who describe terrorist attacks as incidents? Or do we want strong politicians who can see the danger and fight against it efficiently?" Well, I know one politician who saw the danger. Back in August of 2016 in Youngstown, Ohio, candidate Donald Trump had this to say about radical Islam.
Nor can we let the hateful ideology of radical Islam, its oppression of women, gays, children, and non-believers be allowed to reside or spread within our own countries. We must use ideological warfare as well, very important, and they use it on us better than we have ever even thought of using it on them, but that will change. Just as we won, just as we won the Cold War in part by exposing the evils of communism and the virtues of free markets, so too must we take on the ideology of radical Islam.
After he was elected, President Trump issued an executive order to temporarily halt travel from countries of concern and crack down on illegal immigration. For that, he was branded as cruel and heartless. You know what's cruel and heartless? Bikers and pedestrians run over in broad daylight in a major American city. That's cruel and heartless. Trump's instincts about what it takes to secure the homeland are correct. Protect our borders, deport lawbreakers, build a wall, halt refugees from certain countries given the severity of the threat. These are common sense solutions. So far, here's what we know. The slime that took 8 lives today is a radicalized Uzbek. He got a green card through the diversity visa program, according to my sources. You know what Donald Trump proposed in his immigration reform priorities to Congress a few weeks ago? The president expressly asked for the elimination of the diversity visa program that grants 50,000 green cards annually at random through a lottery. It's a total scam. Tonight, I'm also thinking of those activist lower court judges, like those 2 Obama appointees who just weeks ago ruled against the president's travel bans, calling them anti-Muslim. Though Uzbekistan was not on the list, it should be. I'd love to ask Judges Derek Watson and Theodore Schwang, is it now time to restrict who comes into our country? Shouldn't we now make sure that all visitors or U.S. visa holders are not a threat to our citizens? Throughout the campaign, President Trump warned about the refugee flow into the United States, which is why so many were shocked this month when he agreed to permit 45,000 refugees into the country. We're apparently doing extreme vetting on them. I asked General Kelly exactly what that meant last night. Okay, now how are we extreme vetting? What is extreme vetting?
Extreme vetting is we simply interview people and have to satisfy ourselves that the person we're talking to is indeed the person who they claim.
Pretty tough to do in some cases. There are no records.
And frankly, impossible to do in some cases.
So they won't come in then. If you can't really verify that, they're not coming in.
If we can't verify, I don't think we should let them into the country.
President Trump was elected in large part, because voters appreciated his no-nonsense pragmatism on issues like homeland security and immigration. Although we can't stop all terror attacks in the United States, the safety of the American people demand that we do what we can to stop those attacks that are preventable. 9/11 should have made it obvious to everyone that Islam has a hideous radicalization problem. Donald Trump put the onus on Muslim leaders on his first foreign trip to get their houses in order and reform from within. Here at home, we should not lose one more American life because politicians don't have the nerve or the will to do what's necessary to secure the homeland. Our safety is their primary responsibility, and that's the angle. Now joining us with a reaction to today's terror attacks in New York City is Ed Davis, who was commissioner of the Boston Police Department during the 2013 Boston Marathon attack, and Jim Hansen, president of the Security Studies Group here in Washington. Gentlemen, another dark day for the United States. It is so infuriating to me on so many levels. I know there's a lot of sadness, but I'm trying to turn sadness into a righteous indignation toward action. What are your initial thoughts on this, given what we know so far?
You know, if this guy actually came in on a diversity visa, I don't think that qualifies jihadism as something we want diversely entering this country. So I think we need to start with what's called extreme vetting. You know, President Trump immediately after this said he's going to ramp up the extreme vetting even more now than what you talked to General Kelly about last night. And I think that's necessary. I mean, if you want to talk about a model country for the travel ban, Uzbekistan has a massive jihadist problem. Their Islamic movement of Uzbekistan pledged loyalty to ISIS in 2015. Why are we letting people in from there if we can't tell who they are? That's a good place to start.
Ed, let's go to you. You led Boston during that extremely difficult period. The Sarnaez brothers carried out their carnage at the Boston Marathon. Now, they hailed from a close in proximity region, Chechnya, if my memory serves me correct. This is Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan was not on the president's travel ban list. I wonder why. I mean, they do have a real problem there, as Jim said, and yet it wasn't on the list. What are your thoughts initially?
Well, when the FBI reported back to us that that the two brothers, that the older brother had visited Dagestan and had, possibly been in radicalized areas, they also said that Dagestan was not on their radar screen as far as radical Islam, and Uzbekistan is even more moderate than the Caucasus area. So the problem here is that this is popping up all over the world, and it's extremely important that we pay attention to where it's happening and we put logical steps in place to protect ourselves. Just on the streets of Boston last year, after the marathon attack, there was a terrorist that was shot and killed by Boston police and FBI agents as he was going to execute a Boston police officer. And if you look at the ACLU website in Boston, they're boasting about the fact that they stopped the Boston police from looking at open source material on Twitter and Facebook for people that were using radical terms. If this guy is in the United States and he's been radicalized, looking at his Facebook postings, these are public postings. These aren't private email communications. These are things that they're saying publicly.
But Ed, why are we letting any of these people into the country? I mean, I know that people say, oh, that's heartless, that's cruel. Look at the bloodstains on the sidewalks in New York. I mean, this idea that the United States has an obligation to bring in hundreds of thousands of people from hot spots where we can't possibly do extreme vetting, because as I said to General Kelly, There are no records that can be easily checked or followed or addresses checked up on. I mean, we're going to do, Jim, an FBI background check on some of these characters from Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan and all of the stands. I mean, this is insanity.
There is no positive right to enter the United States for any reason at all. It is up to us to decide who comes in the country. President Trump has the right, both constitutionally and under existing law, to decide for any reason he can stop immigration from anywhere. So right now, I think there is a legitimate reason to take a look at all of the visa programs, all of the refugee programs, and all of this.
The diversity visa program has got to end. And Ed, I want to go back to you on this. The idea that this is something we just have to get used to. As the Polish prime minister was reacting to comments made in Britain at the time, this is the new normal from the mayor of London. This is another unfortunate incident, but we're just going to go back to the, our regular lives. Well, yeah, of course we're going to go back to our regular lives. That's what we do. But if we can stop these attacks by stopping the people from coming into the country in the first place, why are we playing this politically correct game that ends up with the deaths of Americans? To me, this is just insanity and lunacy. Uzbekistan? I mean, why are we letting people in from Uzbekistan ever? I'll let you finish it off, Ed.
Well, Laura, I'm informed by this issue by talking to the relatives of the people who were killed in these attacks, by talking to the victims that lost limbs in the marathon attack. And I think that this is similar to what was happening in London leading up to World War II. Winston Churchill was trying to tell people what the danger was. And we're living in the same kind of a reality right now. People don't realize it until they've lost a loved one, or they've talked to somebody who has lost someone or lost a limb in a situation like this. And until that happens, I don't think we're ever going to be able to effectively prevent these things from occurring.
But what they're doing, let's be really clear what's going on here. They want to portray Trump as the problem. Trump is cruel, heartless, all the things that they say. He's the problem, and meanwhile, people are gaming our immigration system, getting federal benefits, welfare, all the Obamacare. They come in, and then we get dead people. I'm sorry, but no, Trump's the problem?
Trump's right. Trump's looking at this
This
with
is why he
clear
was
eyes.
elected. People are tired of this in this country. The victims, and I'm so glad, Ed, you have the ear of the victims, and you have their hearts, too. We should listen to the people who've been brutalized by illegal immigration, by this gaming of our immigration system, by the asylum program that the Tsarnaev brother abused, and all these other issues. And I'm so upset about this tonight. And gentlemen, both of you, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura.
Up next, the debate over a radical Islamic threat that looks to be gaining ground in the West. You bet. We're going to go live to the ground for some breaking news on today's New York City terror attack. Coming up.
I believe when an individual yells out Allahu Akbar, all the indicators and hallmarks of an act of terror. And I think that's true in this case. We know for 2 years they've called out in their internet magazine to attack by vehicle.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of today's terror attack in Lower Manhattan, where a suspect deliberately drove his truck down a bike path, killing 8 and wounding 11. Joining us now with the latest from the scene is Fox News' Shepard Smith. Shep.
Laura, new tonight and new this hour, Fox News has now confirmed earlier reports that police found in and around the vehicle which the suspect had driven, that rented Home Depot truck, notes written in Arabic pledging allegiance to ISIS. I'm told one note in the vehicle and another appears to have fallen out in a black leather bag that fell out as he exited the vehicle after it crashed into a school bus. Fox News has also learned out of that bag fell a hunting knife in a black leather sheath with a belt clip attached to it, a knife he apparently did not use as he was flailing his arms in the streets of Lower Manhattan, waving 2 fake guns, shouting Allahu Akbar before police, as one from the 6th precinct put it, lit him up. The police here on scene earlier told me that they believe they had shot him in the stomach. The Fox News has now confirmed he was actually shot in the leg. No major arteries hit. He is expected to survive. The surgery is over, we believe, though we haven't been able to confirm that. He'll be held at least through the night, and authorities do expect to have him available for questioning at some point. He arrived in the United States, we've now learned, in 2010 from Uzbekistan, and as you mentioned earlier, on that green card visa through the lottery program, which you mentioned. He's lived in Tampa, Florida for a time, and in nearby New Jersey across the river. We believe Paterson, New Jersey, where right now NewJersey.com reports police have an area of garden apartments attached to a mosque surrounded. And in addition, in nearby Passaic, New Jersey, which is about 15 miles from the scene here in Lower Manhattan, they have surrounded a vehicle at a Home Depot. It is believed that he drove that vehicle to that Home Depot store in Paterson, New Jersey at about 2 o'clock this afternoon, though we can't confirm the time, to rent that truck, then drove it into Manhattan, we don't know which way yet, and began that 1 mile trek of terror along the West Side Highway. Started around Houston Street on the northern end of the Soho neighborhood, finished here in the shadow of World Trade Center after about a mile, running into many people, mowing over pedestrians and bicyclists especially, mangled bikes seen along that guarded bike path there. In the end, 8 people dead, somewhere around 12 injured, taken to 2 different hospitals. We expect updates on their condition in the morning. Among those injured, 4 people from nearby Stuyvesant High School, which was letting out for the classes for the day this afternoon. 2 of those are staff members, I'm told. 2 of them said to be students. One of those students critical at a trauma center at Bellevue Hospital in Lower Manhattan. Investigators still working to find out if he acted in coordination with anyone else. And according to our sources and those of our intelligence correspondent, Catherine Herridge, there is no indication yet that he was radicalized by any group overseas. Whether he was radicalized online in some other way, we don't yet know. As for accomplices, no indication, Laura, not yet.
Shep, thanks. The attack suspect's background and how we got into this country is raising obvious questions about the role radical Islam played in the attack, and also whether a visa program needs a major overhaul. Here to discuss from Boston, Robert Spencer, director of the website Jihad Watch, and from Portland, Oregon, Harris Zafar, author of the book Demystifying Islam, Tackling the Tough Questions. Gentlemen, it's good to see both of you on a very difficult night. Harris, let's start with you. This man apparently had some allegiance to ISIS, notes found at the scene, cried out Allahu Akbar, truck attack after truck attack in Europe, now coming to the United States, innocents slain. How does the average person watching this show tonight not think, given the pattern of behavior, that Islam does not have a major problem with radicalization?
Well, I'd be remiss, Laura, if I don't begin first and foremost by expressing the Ahmadiyya Muslim community's deepest condolences to the victims of today's attack, and also expressing our deep gratitude to the bravery of our law enforcement officers who saved so many lives today. And since we are Muslims who believe in that Messiah, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadian, who came to revive the original teachings of Islam, we not only unreservedly condemn these attacks and stand by innocent civilians who we want to protect as well. But we also understand that there is indeed a problem amongst certain groups around the world who are being radicalized. And the international leader, the Khalifa of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, has indeed said that the West should be very careful not to let all people pour into their country, that they should be very vigilant about who is allowed in, because ISIS sympathizers and fanatics like them might sneak into the country under the guise of being refugees. So the safety and security of this country is paramount. What we say is that to have a nuanced approach, and instead of banning wholesale people from certain countries, which Uzbekistan was not even on in that list, and the most troublesome country, Saudi Arabia, is not on that list either. Instead of that, have a nuanced approach where we can get to their root, which is their ideology
Harris,
and their funding.
Harris, I think you're right about there's an ideological issue here. But, I mean, is that a lot of room for nuance when we're talking about innocent lives? You probably wouldn't want this guy moving into your neighborhood. And the Ahmadiyya Muslims are considered heretics. You're considered heretics by other Muslim sects, by the Salafists and so forth. So they take issue with your interpretation, correct, of Islam, which I know is an ongoing, long-standing debate within Islam. But, Robert, let's go to you. This is
yeah,
just
certainly, you're
way,
right.
we're
Just to
getting,
answer, since you asked that question,
right,
absolutely.
Yes, you're
extremists,
absolutely
that's
right,
why
Laura.
our
Yeah.
Americans
Yeah,
know that we are on the side of
The
Americans
Ahmadiyya
because
Muslim
we
community
also
is less
are the
than
victims
2%
of
of Muslims
the
worldwide.
extremists out there.
And so,
okay,
if
one
the
at a time,
gentleman
guys. Robert,
Yes,
we'll
you
go
asked
to you.
me.
Harris, you get in a minute. Just hold on, guys. So
the Ahmadiyya
Robert,
Muslim community is
Robert,
less than 2%.
Okay, it is.
Of
It's
Muslims
a small
worldwide.
percentage. But
Considered
Robert,
heretics persecuted in Pakistan and Indonesia.
Right. So they are persecuted, but we have a radicalization problem here. And
Yes.
how do we, in good conscience, put another American life in jeopardy with this insane program of allowing people into the country whose backgrounds, frankly, we cannot check, because now we can get radicalized on the internet. You can come here and get radicalized. Yes, American citizens can as well, but okay, we already have that problem. We don't need more problems. That's my view. Robert.
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Look, these programs all should have been ended long ago, and they need to be ended immediately. The fact is, we have a hard choice. There is no reliable way to distinguish between peaceful refugees and people like this New York City murderer who are jihadis. There is just simply no way to tell. And so we either have to let in some harmful people or keep out some harmless people. And all these years we've been told we're racists and bigoted Islamophobes if we want to keep out the harmful people, because that will mean keeping out some of the harmless people. Well, unfortunately, we have to make hard choices here, and this is it. And the fact is that there is jihad recruitment going on in mosques. This guy has been in the country 7 years. He certainly went to mosques. And so along with ending these programs, there has to be a challenge to the Muslim community to start teaching against these ideas of jihad. His mosque needs to be investigated. It needs to be shut down if it's preaching jihad terror.
Harris, do you believe that mosques should be surveilled given this radicalization problem? I know your sect does not have this issue, this doesn't have this problem, but others do, and it hurts all of Islam to have this poison from within. It hurts the whole faith, obviously. It's terrible.
Yeah, we're in a unique position. That's the only Muslim community that's in 210 countries around the world with one single leader, and that leader has been very clear, His Holiness, that he has no problem with the government officials surveying our mosques because we have nothing to hide. Ultimately, the solution that he has offered forward is to root out the root of the problem, which is both the ideology and the funding. Traces of the funding of ISIS seem to go to Saudi Arabia, yet we never even talk about banning Saudi Arabians from entering the country, and instead we're giving them arms.
Yeah,
we're selling them arms,
and the victims in
Yemen are not allowed to come to the country.
The 9/11 hijackers. I appreciate it, gentlemen. We're out of time, but yeah, we have a lot of problems. We just don't need any more coming into the country. Gentlemen, both of you, we really appreciate it tonight. And after today's attack in Lower Manhattan, there's a lesson to be learned from comments John Kelly made to me last night. We're going to explain coming up next. Welcome back. We're monitoring the situation in Lower Manhattan, where 8 people died earlier today after a man deliberately drove a rental truck down a crowded bike path in an act of pure terrorism. Future historians will no doubt write about radical Islamic terrorism as a major issue of our time, and I hope we will leave lessons on how to defeat jihad for the future. But maybe we won't, considering how history has been treated recently in America. Last night, when I sat down with White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, we discussed the recent efforts, primarily from the left, to tear down and wipe away monuments and relics of some of the most important leaders in American history. Here's what General Kelly had to say.
I think it's just very, very dangerous, and it shows you how much of a lack of appreciation of history and what history is. I would tell you that Robert E. Lee was an honorable man. He was a man that gave up his country to fight for his state, which in 150 years ago was more important than country. It was always loyalty to state first back in those days. Now it's different today. But the lack of an ability to compromise led to the Civil War. And men and women of good faith on both sides made their stand.
Of course, the very suggestion that our history be appreciated, warts and all, led to what has become a common media practice in these times: mass hysteria.
This was not a close call. America mattered then, and it matters now. History is not history when it comes to the Civil War. These monuments were put up during Reconstruction to stick it to freed black people and to let them know that there would be a new Jim Crow.
The language Kelly used is straight out of sort of mid-20th century textbooks. You know, it's the myth of the lost cause, where the Confederacy is noble leaders like Robert E. Lee being motivated not over slavery but over love of state first.
If Mr. Gregory and Mr. Avalon cared to do the smallest bit of research, they would quickly discover that even folks like renowned Civil War historian Shelby Foote and, you know, that rabid alt-writer expressed Kelly's very sentiment. Joining us now for reaction, two historians, Craig Shirley, a presidential historian and Ronald Reagan biographer, the author of the new book, Citizen Newt, and Jane Hampton Cook, the author of 9 books about U.S. presidents and American history. Great to see both of you. Jane, let's start with you. He got hammered, Kelly, for the comments he made yesterday about Robert E. Lee.
He did. And I was reading the criticism, and I thought, this is really exaggerated. I mean, maybe General Kelly's thoughts were incomplete. He could have mentioned slavery. He could have explained more about that.
I think we don't know about slavery. I mean, is that something we don't know about at this point?
Right, but he's not a historian, and I think he's got such a mellow, calm tone to him. You listening to him talk, I just didn't get the sense that he was being disrespectful or out of sync with history.
Craig, John F. Kennedy talked about the gallant failure of Robert E. Lee and how he moved forward toward Reconstruction with the bravery of his troops. FDR, one of the finest Christian gentlemen, one of the finest soldiers America had ever seen. FDR and John F. Kennedy.
John Cash wrote a song, Thank You, Robert E. Lee, because Lee laid down his arms at Appomattox. And why Lee is indeed great is because of what he did after the Civil War. Because Jefferson Davis, the president of the South, wanted to break up the Confederate Army, form militias and guerrilla units, and keep the war going. And they would have, too. Those Southern boys were born with guns coming out of the womb, is that they could live off the land for many, many years, and they could keep the war going for a number of years. Lee broke with Jefferson Davis and said, no, we must rejoin the Union, lay down your arms, go back to your farms.
And you think, Jane, of the American story. We hope it's an unending story. It just goes on and on and on. Like in all of our lives, we have failures, we have triumphs, we have successes, we have virtues and sins. And yet, we want to look at each monument or relic through the eyes of the politically correct idea of the time. And obviously, everyone knows that slavery is evil, but the idea that because someone happened to be born in the South, and how many people, maybe two of you historians know, how many Southerners didn't side with the South? Not many, right? Not many, at least during the war.
Most of them were not slave owners.
Right, most of them were not slave owners. Right. But isn't it important now that we have a historical understanding that we can gravitate toward? We don't have to agree on everything, but there are certain things like the anthem and our founding that we can say, God, these were truly great men. They had great sacrificial concern for the future of the country.
Well, and it's looking at individuals with optimism and hope and seeing the good. I mean, I write books about history because of patriotism, to inspire the good and the hopeful in our country. King George III, after the Revolutionary War, our enemy during the Revolution, said he believed that Republican governments were dependent on an ardent love of country. He even recognized that patriotism was a key to a Republican government continuing. And he was our enemy during the Revolutionary War.
Tocqueville, Lafayette. I mean, they came to this place, this new place, and they thought, there's something incredible going on here. So special. They almost loved the country more than the people who were just being born in the country at the time. And Craig, we have these terrorist attacks, mass migration of people into the United States from countries that are very different. Doesn't mean they can't come here and be successful. But boy, when we don't even teach our own citizens the goodness that is America, what are we going to do? What does this mean for the people coming in from totally different cultures?
Well, obviously we're worried about the future. If we're not teaching the past, how can we expect to teach the present into the future? Is that who the enemy is, why he's here, why he shouldn't be here, what is going on in this country, what is the battle at stake? Is that if we don't understand the meaning of the American Revolution, how 100 years from now are we going to expect students to understand the meaning of the war on terror?
And Craig, remember Reagan's farewell address? Because Craig knows every speech.
Yes.
Reagan's farewell address spoke about the teaching of history
about
to our
how
young
important
people.
It was. That's right, exactly.
We've got to know, why we flew those missions, what we did did on D-Day. We
Yes.
have to know the story of America. And if we don't, we won't know what it's like to try to how important it is to save America. What's worth saving?
You mentioned John Kennedy. Nobody quoted the framers and founders more than Ronald Reagan
What's happened
and
to
John
those
Kennedy.
Democrats? What's happened to those Democrats? Where are those Democrats today? Not many.
No, they're not there. I mean, well, John Kennedy was a different kind of Democrat. He was.
Yeah, he was
you know,
like a Republican.
He was. A historian at the time called him an enlightened cold warrior. He was essentially a Republican. Look how many times he used the word freedom in his inaugural address.
Freedom, liberty, the
Yes,
founders.
that's right.
All good stuff. Jane and Craig, great to see you both. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And I got a little smarter during this segment. And up next, Pat Buchanan was in the Oval Office when Nixon chose to fire the Watergate special prosecutor. Can you believe that? So what does he think President Trump should do about Robert Mueller? He'll tell us next. Pat Buchanan is a political and populist legend. He served under 3 presidents, including he was in the Oval Office with Richard Nixon on the very evening of the Saturday Night Massacre. I spoke with Pat earlier about whether history may repeat itself over Special Counsel Bob Mueller and the state of the Trump presidency. Hey, Pat, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Congratulations on the new show.
Thank you. I had to invite the guy who kind of, back in 1992, kind of reset the Republican Party, or at least tried to, back toward Reagan. And all those years later, you have this guy, Donald Trump. He didn't have the pitchfork, but ended up winning the presidency in November. And the same people who were trying to drive you out of the party are trying to drive Trump down now on the right. And they're out there.
Well, exactly. But Trump ran on those same issues we had back then that matured: secure the border, no more foreign wars, unnecessary wars, and also no more of these trade deals that are exporting American jobs and factories. And Trump ran and beat 15 or 16 establishment Republicans, amazingly won the election.
But you wouldn't know it by listening to John McCain. He was at the U.S. Naval Academy and gave a speech where he talked about the isms and how protectionism, isolationism, nativism are taking over the Republican Party, and how the fake crackpot conspiracy theories are dominating the national conversation. He's acting like, Trump's the problem, not the solution.
But the point is that look, John McCain is making this case, but the idea was, we lost all these jobs, we lost these factories. What is wrong with protecting American factories, America's national independence, American sovereignty? That's what the American people voted for.
But he'll say, Pat, that that's not what the Republican Party's history is. But does he know his history, given what Republican presidents have done vis-a-vis tariffs throughout the history of the Republican Party?
Since Eisenhower and Nixon, we became a free trade party, but protectionism is the policy of Lincoln. The Morrill tariffs, they passed it 10 times during the Civil War. Tariffs were in the protectionism was in every Republican platform until 1948. How do they think they built up this mighty industry in the United States, the greatest in the history of the world? How did the Chinese, name me one country in the world, great country, great economy, that built up its economy on free trade?
Well, let's talk about what McCain says about walls. He said, look, we tear down walls. We don't put up walls. Of course, making the reference to Reagan, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Is that appeal?
Would that be the same John McCain who walked along the border and said, build the dang fence? I mean, when he was running last time out, look, the entire Western civilization, the issue of mass immigration from the third world, unchecked immigration, is causing countries all over the Western world to build fences, to build security fences, to control immigration. Ronald Reagan said a country that doesn't secure its borders, doesn't protect its borders, isn't really a country anymore.
What do you think Reagan would think of all of this today? Where the party is, where the...
I think Reagan was a conservative of the heart, I believe, like me. He was intellectually there. But he was, at one point he did ask him that people talked about all the, about trade deals, and he said, what happens to the workers? I mean, when he ran in trouble with Harley Davidson, I remember we said Harley's going under. And he said, why? He said, the Japanese are sending all these big bikes. They're dumping them in here to kill Harley Davidson. Okay, put a 50% tariff on Harley Davidson.
Saved Harley.
Saved Harley, and Reagan, and a couple months later, was up there sitting on one of the big Harley hogs.
And we have all those men in their 60s and 70s with those skinny little ponytails riding all over the country. Now that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this special counsel probe.
Sure.
When you have a low-level guy who was a volunteer, he was on one of these foreign policy boards. I've never heard of him before. George Papadopoulos. Right. They wired him up, it turns out, and they sent him out to try to set up meetings with Trump campaign folks and so forth. He pled back in early October. He started cooperating back in July.
Right.
Well, like this could this be a real problem for the Trump agenda?
Well, let me just say this. Look, even with Papadopoulos, there is no underlying crime. He didn't commit any crime. Even if he had knowledge, look, the Russians told me they got all these emails and they're going to dump them. That's not a crime. His crime was lying, quite frankly. This is a real difficulty. I think there's no underlying crime in this whole alleged collusion conspiracy, and there's no collusion between Trump and Putin. But there's a problem if you call people on the phone and you got that wire on and he's been told what to say. This is the real problem, I think, for the Trump administration legally. But the other one is this is going to be a massive distraction. I've gone through these things, Iran-Contra. I went through Watergate with Nixon.
Goes on for years and years and years.
They go on, and these. I mean, I am really against the whole special prosecutor idea.
I think it's unconstitutional.
I agree. These are mighty engines which are directed to destroy presidencies. Look, and if the Congress of the United States feels that Trump ought to be impeached, then impeach him.
Yeah,
you got the constitutional obligation. They say we don't want it. We don't want to decide where to go to war. We don't want to decide what's the coinage. Turn that over to the Fed. I mean, the Congress has abdicated enormously, and this is one of those signs of abdication.
Pat, one of the narratives that we're seeing play out in the media, and this is mostly fomented by the left, but picked up every now and then by figures on the right, more of the establishment globalist figures, questioning Trump's fitness for office. He's seething, they claim, through leaks of someone to the press. He was seething over the Mueller indictments yesterday. He gets enraged when people leak. He gets frustrated. He's flying off the handle. They keep repeating that, and I think that's a big setup toward trying to remove him from office. I think they wanted to do this from the very beginning, seeking to undo this populist victory because it's working so far. Look at the economy. Look at what's happened with consumer confidence.
And besides that, you mentioned the economy. You got the growth at 3%, 2 quarters in a row. You got consumer confidence as well. You got money in the stock market. I'm sure you do. It seems to be doing fairly well.
Thank God. I always lose in the stock market.
But these are all positive. And this is one of the things I will say that concerns me about this investigation. If this gets gone and there's more indictments and people say, Trump is going to be a broken president, and that's what happened. Of course, the economy went bad on Nixon in 1973 after his 49-state landslide. And when they do that, then all the jackals come out and they say we can get him. But I just don't see it right now because, as I say, the Papadopoulos thing, I don't know what the guy did other than tell a lie about what he didn't do.
And meanwhile, you have Fusion GPS. You have Anthony Podesta resigning from his Democrat consulting lobbying firm.
I think John's going to follow pretty soon.
Yeah, so the Podestas will be going on Dancing with the Stars.
But that's really the case. The Russians gave material to this Christopher Steele, who's the British agent, who gave it to Fusion GPS, which got it spread all over this city in this dossier. You had Russians involved in it. You had the Democratic, and Podesta ran the campaign, and Wasserman Schultz, and they paid the money, the $12 whatever million this was taken out of it. And they said, well, we didn't ask what they did with the money. That's not credible. So I do believe that, this is something that Mueller himself ought to be investigated because it is an example of Russians interfering in the American election, frankly, to damage Trump.
Greg Sargent today in the Washington Post was saying this is all Republican, wild theories about deep state, and they're trying to delegitimize the hardworking men and women of the FBI, and they're trying to work against the traditional professionalism of the FBI and Bob Mueller, who apparently no one can ever criticize. Bob Mueller is should be up on Mount Rushmore. And he's arguing that this is just a tactic being used by Republicans, again, to undermine an ongoing investigation.
I've never seen a city, even including 1974 and Watergate, it was so hateful and hostile toward an incumbent.
Is it worse than with Nixon?
It is. Nixon at the very end, it was as bad. There was real enthusiasm for seeing Nixon go down, destroying the guy. There's a smell of blood. The scent of blood is in the nostrils.
But why? What's behind that, Pat? What's really behind what the media, the left, and the globalists in the party are trying to do?
Donald Trump came to Washington, D.C. and stole what the Republicans thought was going to be their turn, and he's taken away the leadership of the country, and they can't stand the guy. And I think, I've rarely ever seen this, but they are determined to break this man and to bring him down and to finish him up. Look, Donald Trump got 4% of the vote in Washington, D.C. You think this is not a hostile city?
4%.
4%.
That much. Wow. That was probably just my vote. My relatives. Let's talk before we let you go about this idea that Trump is like thinking of or toying with the idea or grappling with firing Mueller. Of course, that brings me back to your days in the Oval Office with Richard Nixon on the night of the Saturday Night Massacre.
Right.
Tell us about whether that. I mean, he has the constitutional right to do it, no doubt about it. Special counsels in the executive branch, but that would set off a huge firestorm.
Nixon had no choice. I mean, I wrote him that morning. I said, "You're going to have to fire Richardson," because Richardson, in my judgment, turned on us. He said he would fire Cox if Cox didn't accept a deal. And so Richardson says, "I'm not going to do it. You know, if I'm going to stand by Cox." And we had Henry Kissinger in Moscow. You had the Middle East war going on at that time. Nixon's telling Brezhnev, I will move in the Middle East if you do. So I said, "You got no choice, Mr. President." So Nixon calls me over to the Oval Office at 3 in the afternoon, and he says, "I got Henry over there with Brezhnev. What is Brezhnev going to say if I let the Attorney General of the United States buffalo me and bull me and make me back down? He's got to go." And so we talked about it for about 45 minutes, and he said, "You better go out this way because Elliot's coming in this way with Haig." And so I went out this way, and there was my friend Elliot Richardson. I said, "Hi, Elliot, how are you?" And he had this sort of smile on his face, and Haig had his head down like a sheriff leading someone to execution as he walked in and got hammered by Nixon. I went over to this restaurant over here where they had the roller skates and everything, and I told 2 friends of mine in town, there'll be impeachment resolutions in the House on Tuesday. And sure enough, there are about 20 of them next Tuesday.
And do you have a doubt that that would happen if
I had
Donald
no doubt.
Trump
I had urged
moved
Nixon,
against Mueller?
I had urged Nixon to burn the tapes 3 months before and to get rid of Archibald Cox before he'd been built up. But by then, he had this huge operation. The press was covering him. So it was just an enormous
So if you had to
explosion.
advise Trump today?
Don't do it. I would say don't do it.
Pat Buchanan, my friend. Great to see you. All right, thanks for joining us.
Congrats again, kid.
All right, appreciate it. Up next, a live update from Lower Manhattan on today's terror attack. Stay with us. There are a lot of fast-moving developments this evening related to today's terror attack in Lower Manhattan, but in spite of it, the city's big Halloween parade has gone forward this evening, and Fox's Eric Shawn is standing by. Eric?
Good evening, Laura. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio says New Yorkers are strong, resilient, and we do not give in. And tonight we witnessed that firsthand, 50,000 strong. It was the annual New York City Halloween parade where tens of thousands take to the streets in Greenwich Village. They did so in spite of and perhaps in response to the horrible events of today. You know, Laura, this parade is really kind of crazy. It's creative and outrageous. It's a celebration of life. Today, taking on a special sense of poignancy. People we talked to because of the emotional tragedy said they came out to march and be part of this event to be defiant.
Because I don't want to live in fear. And also, if we hide, that's also the proof that they make a damage.
I refuse to live in fear. Absolutely not. This is about having fun and the whole bit. I refuse to live in a box.
My parents were kind of worried, but they were like, don't live in fear. They wanted me to come.
In France, we had this little moment after the terrorist attacks where we were afraid to go out, etc. And I hope it won't be the case here in New York.
Are you afraid now, tonight?
No, I'm not afraid. No. It's an error to be afraid. It's a mistake, sorry. It's a mistake to be afraid.
So well said. As you can see behind me, there's a wall of police cars here protecting 6th Avenue. They've had this throughout 6th Avenue and on side streets to prevent a possible copycat of what we saw earlier today. So, Laura, tonight we saw the New York and the American spirit on display. And this evening, we're just blocks from the terrorist attack site. The World Trade Center antenna is lit up in red, white, and blue. Back to you in the
love
studio.
it. What a great story. Thanks so much, Eric. And we close and continue on a bit of a lighter note. My sons, along with millions of children across the United States, went trick-or-treating tonight, blissfully unaware of the true evil that exists in the world. Dimitri's costume with the red eyes, I have no idea what that is. But of course, Nico on the right is Darth Maul. And that's all the time we have tonight. But tomorrow night, I'll have an exclusive interview with Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. He rarely gives interviews. You are not going to want to miss this. And good night, everyone. Shannon Bream is up next.